The sun hung low over the Arizona hills, turning the red dust of Silver Creek into gold. It was the kind of small, hard town that forgot kindness long before it struck silver. The miners trudged through the streets with the weight of their sins and pickaxes on their backs, while women hid their worries behind lace bonnets and long skirts. Silver Creek was a place where a person's worth was measured not by the strength of their heart, but by their bloodline, their fortune, or the land they owned. And that was why Clara Whitmore lived on the edge of town, alone. Her cabin sat half a mile past the church, near the dry riverbed that hadn't carried water in 3 seasons. It leaned a little to the east as if weary of standing against the wind. Each dawn, Clara walked into town with her sewing basket, her dark hair tied back and her shawl faded from years of use. She was a seamstress and a good one, but the folks of Silver Creek only came to her when they needed her work in secret. They liked their shirts mended and their Sunday dresses hemmed, but they didn't like to admit it was done by the half-Mexican girl with the cursed blood. Her mother, Maria de la Luz, had been a healer, gentle and wise, with the gift of herbs and prayers whispered over fevered brows, but the town had never forgiven her for saving an Apache child long ago. When fever swept through the settlement and Maria tried to help, the people called it witchcraft. They spat at her door. They said she brought sickness instead of curing it. By the time Clara was 15, her mother had died of heartbreak, and the church bell that tolled for her rang hollow. Not a single person from town came to the burial. Now 25, Clara bore the same dark eyes and sun-warmed skin as her mother, and the same whispers followed her wherever she went. Some called her a beauty, but only behind closed doors. Others crossed the street when she passed. Every Sunday, she sat alone in the back pew, her hands clasped tightly, her heart repeating silent prayers that the Lord might one day forgive Silver Creek for its cruelty. But beneath her quietness, a fire burned, a longing to belong, to be seen, to be loved not for what she could do but for who she was. That longing became her strength. She stitched not only fabric but lives, patching the torn, mending the worn, and doing what she could for the children who came to her hungry. She taught them to read with the same tenderness her mother had taught her, though few parents allowed their young ones near her door. At night, when the desert cooled and the wind carried the sound of coyotes, she would stand outside and gaze toward the white mountains far to the east. There she imagined the world was wider, wilder, and free. One late afternoon, everything changed. Clara was walking back from the livery stable, where she had delivered a repaired saddle blanket for Old Man Cutler. Her boots kicked up the dust and her mind drifted with the hum of the cicadas. Up ahead she saw a horse, sleek, chestnut-colored, trembling and sweating, tangled in its own reins. It had thrown its rider. The animal's flank was slashed, bleeding from barbed wire. "Easy now," Clara whispered, setting down her basket. She moved slow, gentle as a prayer. The horse snorted, wild-eyed, but her voice carried a strange calm, the kind that seemed to come from another world. "You're all right, boy. No one's gonna hurt you." It took nearly an hour, but she freed the animal, cleaned its wound with her kerchief soaked in cool water, and whispered softly in Spanish until the creature stilled. When she finally stood, brushing dirt from her skirt, she felt something, eyes on her. From the ridge above, a tall figure on horseback watched in silence. He sat straight-backed, proud, with long dark hair tied in a leather cord. Feathers and turquoise gleamed faintly in the light. His skin was bronzed, his presence both commanding and calm. Even from that distance, Clara could see his expression, not hostile but curious. An Apache. Her heart thudded. Every story she'd been told since childhood echoed in her mind, that they were killers, thieves, merciless savages. Yet as the wind carried the dust between them, she sensed none of that in him. He looked down at her not with hatred but with quiet recognition, like someone seeing a memory come to life. For a long breath, neither moved. Then, without a word, the warrior turned his horse and disappeared beyond the hill. Clara stood frozen. She knew she should feel fear, should run back to town and warn someone, but instead she felt something else, something she couldn't name. A stirring in her chest, strange and ancient, as if a part of her soul had been waiting for that gaze all her life. That night she couldn't sleep. The desert was silent except for the sighing wind through the sagebrush. She sat by her small oil lamp, mending a miner's torn jacket, her fingers trembling. She kept thinking of those eyes, dark as obsidian, steady as a mountain. They didn't belong to a stranger. They belonged to a truth she had forgotten existed. When morning came, the town was alive with gossip. Someone had spotted Apache tracks near the creek. The men loaded rifles. The women whispered of raids. Sheriff Hollis rode out with a few volunteers to scout for savages. Clara stayed silent. She knew saying she'd seen the warrior would bring only more suspicion on her head. They'd say she lured him there, that she was in league with them, but in her heart she felt no fear. Only curiosity. Only wonder. A week passed. Then another. Life in Silver Creek went on, dusty, cruel, and colorless. But for Clara, something had shifted. She began to dream of the mountains, of wind through pine trees, of drums echoing in the night. And always somewhere in those dreams stood the warrior, watching, waiting, calling her name though she didn't know his. She started taking longer walks beyond town, pretending to gather herbs or mend fences. Part of her hoped she might see him again. Part of her feared what it would mean if she did. On one such evening, the sky flamed orange and purple, and the cicadas sang like 1,000 tiny bells. She stood by the creek bed, staring at her reflection in the dry sand. That's when she heard it, the faint rhythm of hooves. She turned, heart hammering. There he was again, on horseback a few yards away, this time closer. This time real, neither spoke. The wind moved between them, carrying the scent of mesquite and wild sage. Clara's voice caught in her throat, but her gaze held steady. He studied her face for a moment, then inclined his head, a gesture of acknowledgement, of respect. His lips moved in a word she didn't understand. Then he pointed toward the mountains, laid a hand over his heart, and rode away. Clara stood rooted as tears filled her eyes. For the first time in her life, someone had looked at her, not with judgment or disgust, but with recognition, as if her soul had been seen and named. That night, she lit a candle by her mother's photograph and whispered, "Someone saw me today. Mama truly saw me." And somewhere out beyond the canyons, beneath a sky heavy with stars, the Apache warrior whispered to the night, "The spirits have shown me the woman with the fire heart, the one who heals the wounded, the one who will change my path." 2 lives, both marked by loneliness and loss, had crossed by fate. Neither yet knew what that meeting would mean. But the desert had witnessed it, and the desert never forgot. Silver Creek was a town that loved its gossip more than its God. It didn't take long before the whispers started. It began with Martha Harlan, the preacher's wife, who swore she'd seen Clara Whitmore standing near the ridge where Apache tracks were found. Then old man Cutler, drunk on whiskey and spite, said he'd noticed her talking soft with one of them heathens. By dusk, every tongue in town was wagging. By dawn, the story had grown teeth. They said Clara was a spy for the Apaches. They said she called spirits from the desert wind. They said her mother's blood was finally showing true. The rumors moved faster than wildfire through dry grass, and there was no water left in Silver Creek to stop them. Clara tried to ignore it at first. She kept her head down, her sewing needle steady, pretending not to hear the muttered slurs or feel the stares burning holes into her back. But it grew worse by the day. Folks she had once mended clothes for now refused to meet her eye. The preacher's sermons turned darker, preaching about the danger of women who consort with the devil's children. Even the children she used to teach stopped coming. Their parents wouldn't let them. By the 3rd week, her shop stood empty. One afternoon, Clara was walking home from the general store when a voice rang out behind her. "Hey there, witch girl. Don't go bringing your savage friends round here." It was Luke Donner, a miner with whiskey breath and cruel eyes. His words cut through the street like a whip. The other men laughed. Clara didn't answer. She'd learned silence was her only armor. But as she passed, Luke spat at her feet. That night she sat by her window, the desert wind whistling through the cracks. Her hands trembled as she tried to sew. For the first time in years, she wondered if she should leave. There was nothing left in Silver Creek but loneliness and hate. Yet a strange pull kept her there, a memory of dark eyes watching her from the ridge, calm as the earth itself. She didn't even know his name, but the thought of him brought a warmth she couldn't explain. It was as if the memory itself defied the coldness of the world around her. The next morning, she found her sewing shop's door smashed in, her baskets overturned, her fabric torn, the crude letters scrawled across the wall in red paint, "Savage Lover." For a long time, she stood there in silence, staring at the wreckage. The sunlight poured through the broken window, slicing across her face like judgment. Then she sank to her knees and wept, not just for her shop, but for the last piece of belonging the town had taken from her. It was the local marshal who found her there, wiping her tears with trembling hands. He looked uncomfortable, more sorry than angry. "Best to move on, Miss Whitmore," he muttered. "People round here got their minds made up." She nodded without a word. What else could she say? By sundown, Clara had packed her few belongings: her mother's shawl, her sewing needles, a small Bible, and a locket containing a faded sketch of her parents. She saddled her old mare, Daisy, and turned her back on the town that had raised her only to spit her out. As she rode away, no one stopped her. Not one person called her name. The only sound was the wind sighing through the empty street, carrying the faint echo of the church bell tolling its hollow note. The desert spread before her, vast and endless. It was both cruel and beautiful, a land that took what it wanted but gave in return something rare: freedom. For 2 days, Clara rode eastward, guided by instinct and memory. The sun burned her skin and her lips cracked from thirst. She followed the dry creek bed, trusting it might lead her to the mountains where the Apache warrior had vanished weeks before. On the third night, exhaustion overtook her. Her mare stumbled and collapsed near a spring hidden between 2 boulders. Clara tried to stand, but her vision blurred. Her knees buckled. The desert spun around her in a dizzy haze. She thought she heard her mother's voice in the wind, whispering her name, then everything went dark. When she woke, the first thing she felt was warmth, not the burning heat of the sun, but the gentle warmth of a fire. The scent of wood smoke filled the air. She blinked, trying to see, and found herself inside a small lodge made of hides and willow branches. A soft blanket covered her shoulders. A shadow moved beside her. It was him, the Apache warrior. He was kneeling near the fire, grinding herbs in a small stone bowl. The flickering light danced over his sharp features, over the beads and bone ornaments that marked his rank. His arm muscles flexed with quiet strength as he worked. When he noticed she was awake, he turned his gaze toward her, calm and steady. "You are safe," he said in accented English. "You fell by the water. The spirits guided me." His voice was deep, rich as the desert earth. Clara tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. He handed her a small bowl of cool water, and she drank greedily. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded, the faintest curve of a smile on his lips. "My name is Taji, of the White Mountain Apache." She repeated it softly. Taji. The name felt sacred in her mouth, like the echo of something familiar. "And you?" he asked. "Clara," she said. "Clara Whitmore." There was a silence, but it wasn't an awkward one. It was deep, respectful, as if both understood something without needing words. "You should not be alone in this land," he said. "There are men who would harm you." "I had no choice," she murmured, looking down. "My town turned on me. They think I'm one of you." He studied her face for a moment, then said quietly, "Perhaps they are not wrong." She looked up, startled, but he wasn't mocking her. His tone was gentle, reverent almost. "My people believe the Great Spirit ties souls together before they are born," he continued. "Some are meant to find each other, even if they are from different worlds. Perhaps your heart beats to the same drum as mine." Clara felt tears sting her eyes. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever seen her as anything but an outcast. Yet here was this man, her supposed enemy, speaking of her as if she were chosen, not cursed. For days she stayed among Taji's people. The women tended her wounds and taught her words in their tongue. The children laughed when she tried to mimic their songs. She helped grind corn, fetch water, and mend clothing, finding comfort in the simple rhythm of the camp's life. In their eyes, she wasn't the witch girl. She was just Clara. At night, she and Taji would sit near the fire. He told her stories, of the stars being the campfires of ancestors, of how love was not possession but protection. She listened, mesmerized. She began to feel that maybe this was where she belonged all along, not among the ones who cast her out, but among those who understood the language of the heart. But fate, like the desert wind, never stayed still. One morning, a young scout rode into camp, his horse lathered in sweat. He spoke quickly to Taji in Apache. Clara couldn't understand the words, but she saw Taji's jaw tighten. "What is it?" she asked. "Soldiers," he said grimly, "from your town. They come hunting." Her blood ran cold. "For you?" "For all of us," he said. "They think we steal cattle. They think we take what is theirs." They will not ask questions first, Clara's heart pounded. She knew what Silver Creek was capable of. She'd seen their hatred firsthand. Now they were coming for the only people who had shown her mercy. She looked into Taji's eyes, her voice trembling. Then I will stand with you. He met her gaze and something passed between them. A vow unspoken but stronger than any word. He reached out, gently tracing his fingers along her jaw. Then you are not one of them anymore, Noya, he said softly. You are of my heart now. Outside, the wind began to rise, carrying dust and warning across the canyon. The storm was coming. Days turned into weeks, and Clara began to feel as if she had crossed into another life, one unmarked by fear, judgment, or shame. The Apache camp was hidden deep within the folds of the White Mountain Range, surrounded by towering pines and red cliffs that glowed like embers at sunset. The air was thin and pure, scented with juniper and the faint sweetness of wild sage. For the first time in years, Clara breathed freely. The people of the camp, Taji's people, welcomed her cautiously at first, then warmly. They had seen too much betrayal from settlers to trust easily, but her hands and heart spoke louder than words. She tended to their sick with herbs her mother once used, sewed clothes for their children, and listened to their stories under the wide sky. The women, strong and graceful, taught her to grind maize, to weave with yucca fiber, to sing their soft songs of dawn. Clara marveled at how life in the Apache village moved to the rhythm of the earth. There was no clock, no bell, no division between work and spirit. Every gesture, every word carried meaning. And in that harmony she found peace. At the center of it all was Taji, the warrior who had saved her, the man who now filled her thoughts like the steady beat of a drum. Taji was not a man of many words, but his silence spoke volumes. His presence commanded respect, not through fear, but through the quiet strength he carried. He moved with the patience of a hunter and the gentleness of one who knew pain. Each morning, Clara watched him from a distance as he trained the younger warriors. His hair, dark and bound in a single braid, caught the light like black silk. His movements were graceful, deliberate, an art born of discipline. The young men called him Dacho, the hawk, for his eyes missed nothing. When he spoke to them, it was always with purpose. A warrior's heart is not in his weapon, he would say. It is in his honor. You fight not to destroy, but to protect. Clara often thought of how different that sounded from the settlers' way of war, where men killed for land, gold, or pride. Taji's world felt older, truer, rooted in something eternal. That evening, as the sun sank low behind the ridges, Taji approached her near the fire. He carried a small wooden bowl filled with painted stones, each carved with symbols. These are the paths of spirit, he explained. Each tells a story. Would you like to see yours? Clara nodded, intrigued. He set the stones before her and began to place them one by one, murmuring words in his language. The firelight flickered between them, painting his features in bronze and shadow. After a moment, he looked into her eyes. You are between worlds, he said softly. 1 foot in the land of your mother, 1 in the land of your father. That is why your soul has never found rest. Clara felt her throat tighten. And what do the spirits say I should do? He smiled faintly. They say you have found what you were meant to find, that your heart has recognized its other half. She froze. The world seemed to hold its breath. The fire cracked, a coyote howled in the distance, and the stars began to bloom above them. You speak as if, she began, as if I know your heart, he finished for her. His gaze held hers, steady, patient. I do not claim it. I only recognize it. She didn't answer. She couldn't. But when he stood and extended his hand, she took it without hesitation. Together they climbed the rocky slope above the camp until they reached a clearing overlooking the valley below. The night stretched vast and endless around them. The Milky Way shimmered like spilled silver across the heavens. My people say each star is a fire in the next world, Taji said quietly. When 2 souls are joined, the spirits make their fires burn close together. That is how we find each other again after death. Clara looked up, tears pricking her eyes. Then maybe I have been following your fire my whole life. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. Or I yours. For a long moment neither spoke. Then he stepped closer, slowly as though afraid she might vanish like a dream. His hand brushed a loose strand of hair from her cheek. She felt the roughness of his palm, the steadiness of his breath. Clara, he whispered, do you fear me? She shook her head. No. Only what the world would do to us if it found us together. The world is far away now, he said. Here, there is only truth. And then under the ancient stars of the Arizona sky, his lips met hers. Soft at first, reverent, as though he were touching something sacred. Her heart pounded, and for a moment, the years of loneliness, rejection, and sorrow vanished. She felt whole, seen, alive. When they finally parted, she looked at him with wonder. Why me, Taji? You could have chosen someone from your own people, someone who belongs. He traced her jaw gently with his thumb. You belong where your spirit is understood, and mine has known yours since before we were born. In the days that followed, Clara found herself falling deeply, helplessly in love. Yet it was not a love of sudden passion, but of quiet certainty. She and Taji shared a bond forged in understanding, respect, and shared pain. He told her of his past, the raids, the broken promises, the soldiers who had slaughtered his kin. I have lost many, he said one night as they sat by the fire. But I do not carry hatred. Hatred poisons the soul, and the soul must be clean when it meets its other half. Clara reached for his hand. Then let me carry some of your sorrow. He looked at her for a long time, his eyes glistening in the firelight. You already have, he said. But peace was fragile in the borderlands. Rumors reached the camp of soldiers moving through the valleys. White men in blue coats, led by Captain Harlan, the same man whose wife had started the gossip in Silver Creek. They claimed Apache bands had raided supply wagons. Taji's people were innocent, but no one in uniform cared for the truth. The elders met under the council tree. Some wanted to flee farther east. Others argued to fight. Taji, ever the voice of reason, said, The soldiers come because they fear what they do not understand. To strike them will bring more death. To meet them with peace may bring survival. Clara watched him, pride swelling in her chest. He was everything her world had never known, a man of honor, courage, and mercy. But she also saw the danger in his choice. The soldiers would not see peace. They would see weakness. That night, as Taji prepared to ride out and meet the approaching troops, Clara stopped him. Please, she whispered. They will not listen. He cupped her face in his hands. If I do nothing, they will come anyway. If I face them, maybe I can save my people. Her heart broke at the calm certainty in his voice. Then let me come with you. No, he said firmly. You are the bridge between our worlds, Clara. If I fall, you must live. You must carry our story. Tears welled in her eyes. Don't speak of falling, he smiled gently. Every man falls, Noya, but the spirit rises again. Remember that. He leaned forward and kissed her forehead. If the dawn comes and I do not return, know that my heart is bound to yours, always. Before he left, he handed her a small pendant carved from bone, shaped like a hawk in flight. For protection, he said. The hawk sees what others cannot. It will guide you if I cannot. She clutched it to her chest, unable to speak. As he rode away into the fading night, the firelight flickered behind her, and the wind carried his final words across the canyon, words that settled deep in her soul. The spirits chose well. Noya, you are my heart. And as the sound of his horse faded into the desert silence, Clara whispered into the darkness, and you are mine. Weeks passed since the battle that scarred the valley, and the land began to heal. The rains came early that spring, washing away the ashes and bringing new grass across the red soil. The stream that had once run dry now sang again, winding its way through canyons lined with wild sage and yellow daisies. But though the world seemed to move on, Clara Whitmore's heart still trembled. Between two worlds, one that had rejected her and one that had saved her, she spent her mornings gathering herbs with the Apache women and her evenings, sitting with Taji near the canyon's edge, where the wind carried the smell of juniper and the cries of hawks circling high above. His shoulder had healed, though the scar still burned dark against his skin, a reminder of the day love and fire had tested them both. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned molten gold, Clara found him standing by the cliff, gazing toward the horizon. Thinking of the battle again? She asked softly. Taji smiled faintly without turning. No, of the future. She stepped beside him, her skirt brushing against his leg. What kind of future do you see? He pointed toward the east where the plains stretched far beyond sight. A land where our children do not know fear, where they learn the songs of both the white and the Apache, Where no man raises his hand because of the color of another's skin. Clara's throat tightened. That's a dream the world may not be ready for. He finally turned to her, his eyes deep with calm conviction. Then we will make it ready, she smiled through her tears. You make it sound simple. It is simple, he said, taking her hand and placing it over his heart. Love is the only truth that cannot be burned, taken, or silenced. It will outlive even the mountains. A few days later, messengers came from Fort Banner, bringing a letter sealed with the mark of the U.S. Army. Clara recognized the handwriting before she even opened it. Captain Harlan's replacement, Major Bennett, a man known for his politics rather than his mercy. The letter summoned her back to Silver Creek. It accused her of treason, of consorting with hostile savages, and of aiding in the attack that had left 6 soldiers dead. When Taji read the words, his jaw tightened. If you go, they will not listen to truth. I know, she said quietly. But if I don't go, they'll send men to find me and to find you. He shook his head. They cannot take you from me, Noya. You belong to the wind now, not to their laws. She smiled sadly. But I must face them. If I run, they'll only see guilt. If I stand, maybe I can protect you. He caught her hand before she turned away. And who protects you? She met his gaze steadily. You already have. When she rode into Silver Creek 3 days later, the townsfolk stopped and stared. Her dress was torn from travel. Her hair streaked with desert wind, and the small silver hawk pendant glimmered at her throat. Whispers spread like wildfire. There she is, the Apache's woman. Traitor. Witch. Clara ignored them. She rode straight to the sheriff's office, her back straight, her chin lifted like a queen walking into her trial. Sheriff Dale, who once tipped his hat to her father's money, wouldn't even meet her eyes. Clara Whitmore, he muttered, reading from the paper. You're accused of aiding hostile Indians and conspiring against the U.S. Army. You'll speak before Major Bennett tomorrow at dawn. I'll speak before God if I must, she said coldly. And I'll speak the truth. That night she sat in the holding cell listening to the clock tick and the rain fall against the dusty windows. But she wasn't afraid. For the first time in her life she felt whole, because she finally knew who she was. When dawn came, the courthouse was filled with the curious and the cruel. Major Bennett sat behind a desk, clean-shaven and cold-eyed, his boots polished brighter than his soul. Mrs. Whitmore, he began, you have been seen among hostile Apache, you fired upon a United States officer, and you are accused of turning against your own people. How do you plead? Clara stood tall, her voice clear. I did fire upon an officer because he was murdering innocent women and children. I did live among the Apache because they showed me more mercy than my own kind ever did. And if that makes me guilty, she paused, eyes burning, then I am guilty of love and conscience, nothing more. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Bennett slammed his hand down. You expect us to believe savages are capable of mercy? Believe what you will, she said evenly. But I've seen more honor in one Apache warrior's heart than in all the men who hide behind uniforms. Bennett's face darkened. You'll hang for those words. Then I'll die with truth on my lips. Before he could reply, a shout came from outside. The door burst open and a dozen Apache riders thundered into town, bows drawn, faces painted in war colors. At their head rode Taji. The crowd scattered in terror as he dismounted and strode into the courthouse, his presence filling the room like a storm wind. He spoke not with rage but with power. This woman is no traitor, he said in English, his voice low and steady. She saved my people. She faced death beside us when your soldiers brought war to our homes. You call her guilty, but I call her Donoya, the heart of the warrior. She is Apache now. Bennett rose from his seat, hand on his pistol. You have no authority here. Taji's gaze did not waver. Then kill me. But know this. The desert remembers every drop of blood spilled in hate. Something in his tone froze Bennett's hand. For a long, charged moment, no one moved. The silence was thick enough to cut. Then from the back of the room, a voice broke through. Let her go. It was Pastor Graham, the old preacher who'd once turned Clara away from the church. His eyes were wet now as he stood. This town has sinned enough. Let her go. Another voice joined him. Then another. Until half the room was murmuring agreement. Bennett's face twisted with fury, but he saw the shift in the crowd and knew better than to fight it. He slammed the papers closed. Fine, he spat. Take your savage and go, but don't ever set foot in this town again. Clara stepped forward, her voice calm. That's the first order I'll gladly obey. They rode out of Silver Creek together, side by side. The sun was high, and the desert shimmered before them like a golden sea. When the last rooftops vanished behind the dunes, Clara let out a long, trembling breath. Taji reached for her hand as they rode. You are free now, Noya. She smiled, tears glistening. No, Taji. We are free. That evening, they reached the Red Canyon, a place sacred to the Apache. The canyon walls glowed like fire under the setting sun, and the river below ran crimson in the light. Here, surrounded by the endless sky, they made their home. Seasons passed. Clara learned the songs of the Apache, and the people came to love her as one of their own. Children ran to greet her, calling her Mother of the Hawks, for she wore her silver pendant always. When the rains came, she and Taji stood beneath them, letting the storm wash over their skin. And when the stars rose, they would sit by the fire, telling their children the story of how love had survived the hatred of men. One night, as they watched the flames dance, Taji drew her close. Do you ever miss your old world? He asked softly. She looked at him, her eyes glowing with firelight. That world never knew me. You did? He kissed her then, slow and sure, beneath the endless canopy of stars. And in that moment, the world felt right again. The pain, the loss, the battles all behind them. For the woman once rejected by all had been found. Not by chance, but by fate. Recognized by a warrior who saw her soul before her face, her heart before her past, and together they wrote a story that no one could erase.